Before we call another witness, let me take all the suspense out of the room and tell you that I don't think we're finishing today. But I can tell you this: we're almost done with the evidence. We probably won't get it all done this afternoon. We'll get almost all of it done this afternoon. So much so that we're not going to have any danger of going beyond, Tuesday of next week, because like I said, we're almost done with the evidence. Some trials are short. Some trials are long. This is a long one. It's really not a trial. It's two trials. That's really what we're doing. We're just doing them at the same time, which is by far the most efficient way to do a case like this, if we can. Sometimes we can't because there's just too much coming and going. In this case, it was present, but not overly so. So keep that in mind. Not only are these important cases, but they're two cases. So that's the jury y'all got selected to. And I say that not because I'm worried that you're not paying attention and are getting frustrated, because I don't think you are. I can tell that you're continuing to be attentive throughout all of these witnesses. So what will likely happen, we'll break at the end of the day. We've got a few more witnesses that the state wants to get on today. Come back Monday and finish up. At that point, sometime Monday morning, one jury I will likely send home and have them come back on Tuesday. I'm not sure which one, because we'll do closings for one and close out that jury Monday, and the second one will come back on Tuesday and have closing arguments and instructions, and then you'll begin to deliberate. So again, we're going to finish by Tuesday. One jury will be done likely on Monday. You never know how long a jury deliberates. They could deliberate a long time. There's no time limit. But that's our schedule, okay? So when you do go home, I'm sure I'll remind you again, obviously a weekend is a long time. Don't give in to the temptation to start talking about the case or looking up any information about the case. Just enjoy your weekend. I'm going to go mow my yard, do some yard work. Maybe you all have similar plans, and then come back Monday refreshed and ready to go, okay? Or maybe not mow the grass if you're fortunate, because it's really hot. But that's what I'll be doing. All right, State, call your next witness.
Will you please introduce yourself to the juries and spell your first and last name for the record?
My name is Jeneline Adona. The first name is spelled Jeannelyn, and the last name is spelled Adona.
And where are you employed?
I'm employed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
How long have you worked there?
Almost 14 years.
In what capacity?
I'm currently a crime laboratory analyst in the biology and DNA section.
Explain your educational background and also training that allows you to fulfill that position.
I hold a Bachelor's of Science degree in cell biology and a Master's of Science degree in genetics. I received a rigorous training at FDLE before I was certified to be an independent case-working analyst. It was composed of two phases, and the first phase was mainly academic that emphasized in understanding the science behind the tests that I perform. The second phase is supervised casework, where I performed STR DNA testing on items of evidence submitted to the laboratory, and this was performed under the supervision of several qualified analysts.
And through your work with FDLE, have you testified in court as an expert in the area of forensic STR DNA analysis?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
Approximately 48 times.
Can you explain for us what is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is the genetic material that is passed on from parents to offsprings. It is the blueprint of life that contains the information that controls all the activities in the body that makes us who we are. No two individuals would have the same DNA with the exception of identical twins.
And where does it exist in the human body?
Every cell of the body contains DNA.
Do methods exist to differentiate DNA from different people?
Yes, they do.
And how is that so?
It is achieved by DNA testing or DNA fingerprinting.
How long has DNA testing been around?
Since the mid-1980s.
Is it only used in a forensic setting or other settings?
It can also be used in other purposes like paternity cases, identification of human remains in the cases of mass disasters like 9/11, and it also is used in organ transplant program to match the recipient to the donors.
What sort of testing does FDLE do?
FDLE performs what is referred to as STR DNA testing.
And what are you looking for in STR DNA testing?
STR stands for short tandem repeats. So all throughout the DNA, which is a very, very long molecule, there are these short segments that are repeated multiple times. The number of times that these segments are repeated are different among individuals.
The portion of the DNA molecule that you look at, does it identify things like hair color, eye color, skin color, anything like that?
No, they don't.
What sort of information does it give you then?
It doesn't give any characteristic or identifying features of individuals. Like say, for example, two individuals would have blonde hair or blue eyes, but they would not necessarily have the same DNA types at the markers that I look at. They are highly different or variable among individuals, and that is why these are the markers that we'll look at.
You indicated earlier that DNA exists all over the human body. What are the common forms of DNA that you get in the laboratory?
Most sources of DNA that are commonly encountered in the laboratory are body fluids like blood, semen, and saliva.
And are you familiar with a common phrase, touch DNA?
Yes, this is when we attempt to collect skin cells from items of evidence.
And you say attempt. Are you always successful in gathering and also analyzing touch DNA?
No, because we didn't know the condition of the items of evidence before it was submitted to the laboratory and under my custody, and the elements that it has been exposed to. And I can't see the cells on the items, so I don't necessarily know if I'm picking up any skin cells on the item of evidence.
So it's different than blood, because you can see blood.
Right.
Can you explain the process, when you say you test for STR DNA testing, what are the steps for that process?
There are 4 different steps that I conduct when I perform STR DNA testing. The first step is extraction, that is isolating the DNA from the evidence, from the stain, and liberating it into the solution. I then measure the amount of DNA in the sample that I have, so that's step 2. After determining how much DNA I have, I then take a portion of the DNA and make many copies of the markers that I'm interested in looking at. I make millions of copies of that, and that is achieved through the instrument called PCR. I then put it on a machine that detects the DNA information contained within the sample that I'm able to analyze.
Okay. And once you complete all of those steps, what sorts of results can you get from an analysis?
There are varying types of results that can be obtained from DNA testing. There can be no DNA results, limited DNA results, complete DNA profile, or mixed DNA profiles.
Are you familiar with something called standards or buccal swabs?
Yes, standards are samples that are collected from known individuals.
In your work as an analyst, do you typically compare, if you do have DNA, known standards to unknown DNA results?
Yes.
You may.
Ms. Aden, I'm going to show you a number of exhibits that have already been introduced into evidence, okay? And you tell me whether you recognize them.
Okay.
States Exhibit 369. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. What is it?
It is the bloodstain card from Aden, Mcclendon.
Okay. That's different than, let's say, a cheek or buccal swab, right?
Yes.
I said buccal swab.
Correct.
Okay. Can you explain what's on that card? It's not opened up.
So this card contains blood from the deceased individual. and it's typically the form of standard that we get from deceased individuals, as opposed to buccal swabs from living persons.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And States Exhibit 366, do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Are you looking at a certain sticker on there to
Yes.
indicate?
So every FDLE case has a unique FDLE case number that is assigned to it by the evidence intake section of FDLE. And every item submitted under that unique FDLE case number gets a unique FDLE item number.
Okay. And whose buccal swabs are those?
These are Carr Jonte Mitchell's buccal swabs.
Okay. States Exhibit 365, do you recognize that? And whose buccal swabs are those?
These are the buccal swabs from Tide Hayward.
States Exhibit, thank you. States Exhibit 363, you recognize that, and whose buccal swabs are those?
These are the buccal swabs from Kobe Norris.
States Exhibit 362, same question.
Buccal swabs from Henry Hayes the third.
Okay. And States Exhibit 361,
Buccal swabs from Cynthia Hayes.
okay. States Exhibit 360,
These are the buccal swabs from San Juan Bradford.
States Exhibit 359,
These are the buccal swabs from Shatoya Williams.
okay. Trade you.
These are the cheek swabs or buccal swabs from Henry Hayes IV.
And that was States Exhibit 367. And last one, States Exhibit 364.
These are the buccal swabs from Montico Brown.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
When you are doing the DNA testing, do you do the testing on the standards and the unknown samples at the same time?
No.
Tell us why not.
The question samples are worked typically before the known standards, so there will be no window for contamination to occur. That is a good laboratory practice that we enforce in the laboratory.
Okay. And do you all take many measures to make sure that there is no contamination when you are conducting DNA testing?
Yes, under our standard operating procedures, all the work areas are cleaned before and after examining an item of evidence, and only one item of evidence is examined at a time. And I also wear personal protective equipment like lab coat, mask, hairnets, and gloves, which I change frequently.
We talked about a number of the results that you can get. Are you familiar with the result called a mixture?
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
A mixture simply means that more than one individual contributed to the DNA profile.
Are mixtures sometimes too complex to resolve?
It is oftentimes too complex to interpret.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could keep this separated, okay? Okay. Ms. Aden, I'm going to show you what's been entered into evidence as States Exhibit 386, 387, 385, 375, 372, 371, and 370. Do you recognize those?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
These are touch DNA swab or swabs from casings from various locations and from vehicle parts like doorknob, or not doorknobs, but
Does that say passenger door
yeah,
exterior?
front passenger door exterior.
Okay. And did you conduct the analysis that you've been talking to us about on those particular items?
Yes, I did.
Can you first start with your lab number, if you could give me the actual, if you could start with State's Exhibit 370, the 9mm shell casing, it should be your lab number 12,
Yes.
okay? What was the result of your DNA testing on that item?
No DNA results were obtained from the swab from 9mm casings.
Was that a touch DNA swab?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so you got no result, no DNA on that.
Correct.
Can you take a moment and explain for us, how does heat impact sometimes your ability to get touch DNA on items such as shell casings?
DNA is a very stable molecule or substance. However, if it is exposed to extreme temperature, it can be degraded or destroyed, such that even if there was DNA there beforehand, but if it was exposed to that kind of environment, then the DNA will be degraded or destroyed and will not be detected.
Okay. Moving on to 371, that's the blue sticker, and it should be your lab item 38. Do you see that one?
Yes.
Okay. Did you conduct DNA testing on that lab item?
Yes, I did.
What is it?
It is a touch DNA swab from a .223 casing.
Okay. What were your findings on that one?
No DNA results were obtained.
State's Exhibit 372 should be your lab item 53. Do you have that one?
Yes.
Okay. What is it?
It's a touch DNA of a .45 caliber casing.
Did you find any DNA on that item?
No.
State's Exhibit 375. It should be a swab from the front passenger door exterior.
It's FDLE item 60. No DNA results were obtained.
State's Exhibit 386, a swab from a 9mm casing passenger side under the hood. Did you find DNA on that?
No, I did not.
State's Exhibit 387, swab from casings underneath the hood. Your lab item 72, did you find DNA on that?
No, I did not.
State's Exhibit, I'm going to approach with those. If I may, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
You're welcome.
I'm going to now show you these fragments, these tiny fragments.
Okay.
Did you process these for DNA?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And for the record, I'm showing the witness State's Exhibit 339, 338, and 336. Did you process those for DNA?
Yes, I did.
And then were you able to find DNA on those exhibits?
No, I did not.
Okay. Is that uncommon for you not to find DNA from touch DNA swabs on things like casings and even these small fragments that appear to be from some type of firearm?
No, most of the casings that I have examined at FDLE in my entire career, I have not obtained any DNA results, with the exception when it was found under the deceased victim, and then it had the victim's DNA on it. But otherwise, I never found DNA results on any of the casings I've ever worked.
All right. Is there a finding which you term, I think, non-interpretable?
Yes.
Can you explain what that means?
DNA results could either be limited, which means there's not enough information in order to make a meaningful comparison or interpretation, or it could be a mixture of so many individuals that it's too complex to interpret.
Okay. I want to focus your attention on your FDLE item number 58. Did you conduct a test of that swab from the driver's exterior front door?
Yes, I did.
And that, for the record, that State's Exhibit 373. What were your findings as it relates to that swab?
Limited DNA results were obtained, which is not interpretable.
Are there certain quality control measures that FDLE does in order to, in their reporting of their findings?
Yes.
And explain what that is.
We have standard operating procedures that we follow. So if there is limited information that is obtained from any piece of evidence that shows either a mixture or a single source profile that does not meet the threshold for a partial profile, then it is determined as limited DNA results.
All right. I want to focus your attention on your lab item 59, and for the record, that states Exhibit 374. Did you conduct an analysis of that item?
Yes, I did.
And where was it purported to be from?
It was a swab from the driver exterior rear door.
Okay. What were your findings?
Limited DNA results were obtained, which is not interpretable.
Okay. And your lab item 61, did you conduct DNA analysis as it relates to that?
Yes, I did.
Where was it from?
It's from the exterior passenger rear door.
And for the record, that states Exhibit 376. What were your findings as it relates to that item?
Limited DNA results were obtained, which is not interpretable.
Focusing your attention on your lab number 73, did you conduct DNA analysis on that item?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And for the record, that states Exhibit 388. Where was that from?
It's from a 7.62 by 39 millimeter casing.
And what were your findings?
Limited DNA results, not interpretable.
Your lab item 85, it states Exhibit 337. Did you examine that item?
I'm sorry?
I said lab item 85. Did you examine that item?
Yes, I did.
Where was it from?
It's from an unknown size fragment from inside passenger front seat.
Okay. What were your findings?
Limited DNA results were obtained, which is not interpretable.
Moving to lab item 88. Did you conduct DNA analysis on that item?
Yes, I did.
And for the record, that states Exhibit 340. What were your findings?
Limited DNA results were obtained, which is not interpretable.
States Exhibit 341, your lab item 89. Where was that from?
It's from an unknown size projectile from above headliner.
What were your findings as it relates to that projectile?
Limited DNA results were obtained, which is not interpretable.
Okay. States Exhibit 342, your lab item 90. Did you analyze that?
Yes, I did.
And what were your findings?
Limited DNA results were obtained, which is not interpretable.
The projectiles that were from the white Corolla that's been identified to you, I believe, as a victim's car, did you find DNA on just one of those projectiles?
What would be the FDLE? Yes.
Are you, do you have a result that you term not interpretable because it's too complex?
Yes, there were several mixtures that were obtained from pieces of evidence under this case that had at least 3 or 5 individuals, and the mixture is too complex to interpret.
Okay. I want to go over those with you. If I could. If I may, I'm going to show you these exhibits we have right
You may.
showing you what's been entered into evidence in State's Exhibit. I'm going to turn them over there in order. State's Exhibit 378.
Okay.
Is that represented as coming from a suspect vehicle with the Florida tag BPI 8202.
Yes.
All right. State's Exhibit 379. Did you analyze that?
Yes, I did.
380. Did you analyze that?
Yes, I did.
State's Exhibit 381,
I did.
382,
I did.
383,
I did.
384.
Yes, I did.
Are those swabs from different areas within that vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. All right. If you could start with your lab item 63.
It's a touch DNA swab from interior driver's compartment.
Okay, and what were your findings as it relates to that touch DNA swab?
It gave results of a mixture consistent with at least 3 individuals, and due to the complexity of the mixture, it is not interpretable.
Okay. State's Exhibit 379, which is your lab item 64.
It's a touch DNA swab from the interior rear driver door, and it gave indications of a mixture of at least 4 individuals, which is complex and is not interpretable.
State's Exhibit 380, which is your 65.
It's a touch DNA swab from the interior rear driver compartment, and it gave a mixture of at least 5 individuals, and that will be difficult to interpret, so it's not interpretable.
Okay. Your lab item 66, State's Exhibit 381.
It's touch DNA swab from interior front passenger door and molding. It gave indications of a mixture of at least 3 individuals, which is complex and not interpretable.
State's Exhibit 382, your 67.
Touch DNA swab from interior front passenger compartment, and it gave a mixture that indicates at least 4 individuals, and it's complex and it's not interpretable.
State's Exhibit 383, your 68.
Touch DNA swab from interior rear passenger door and molding. It gave a mixture that indicates at least 4 individuals, which is complex and not interpretable.
State's Exhibit 384, your 69.
It's a touch DNA swab from the rear passenger compartment, and it also gave a mixture that indicates at least 4 individuals, and it's complex and not interpretable.
Okay. Are you familiar with a newer technology for interpreting complex mixtures within the DNA community?
Yes,
And what is that called?
that is referred to as star mix or STR mix.
And has FDLE just kind of on the verge of getting that?
It has been validated sometime last year and has been implemented.
Okay. At the time that this was worked, were y'all doing star mix?
No, we were not.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I want to talk about one last swab from that car, license tag BPI 82002.
It's FDLE item number 62, and it's a touch DNA swab from the interior driver door.
I want to ask you, from the standards, from that swab, were you able to obtain results on that particular swab?
From item 62?
Yes.
Yes, a mixture that indicates the presence of at least 2 individuals was obtained.
Okay. The standard of Shatoya Williams, that was submitted to you, correct?
Yes.
What were the results as it relates to that swab?
Shatoya Williams is excluded as a contributor to Exhibit 62.
All right. What about Carjonte Mitchell?
He's also excluded.
What about Todd Hayward?
He's excluded as a contributor to Exhibit 62.
What about Kobe Norris?
He's also excluded.
What about Sanquan Bradford?
He's excluded as well.
What about Henry Hayes?
He's excluded as well.
What about Kwame Richardson?
So this mixture, where there's an indication of at least 2 individuals, I was able to obtain what is referred to as a major contributor. So most of the mixtures that we talked about from all those items of evidence were complex. However, for this swab from the interior driver door, only 2 individuals were present in that mixture. And the contribution of one individual is so much greater than the other individual, such that I was able to determine a DNA profile for a major contributor. And that major contributor matches the DNA profile from Kwame Richardson.
In your field, do you give significance to the match that you were able to make?
Yes, I performed a random match probability to determine the frequency of occurrence of the major DNA profile in the general population.
And what were the results of that?
So the frequency of occurrence of the major DNA profile from the interior driver door is greater than 700 billion times.
Okay. Can you explain what that means? That's a big number, and tell us what that means.
So when I perform SDR DNA testing, we conduct population frequency, and this is not dependent on the Earth's population. It takes into account all the possible DNA profiles from person who are living now, person who are going to be born, and person who were alive then. So
Can I ask you, how many people estimated on Earth?
roughly a little more than 7 billion. So we have this threshold that we use, which is 700 billion. So the actual frequency of occurrence of this major DNA profile is so much greater than 700 billion, but we just put that threshold there. So it simply means that I would not expect to see this profile again because it's greater than 700 billion, which is roughly 100 times more than the Earth's population.
I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination.
Just on the interior driver's door that you did find DNA, so Henry Hayes was excluded, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, Ms. Wright.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now, you indicated that one of the standards that you received was of a Monteco Brown, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you use that in any of your DNA analysis?
Yes, I did.
Tell me, in which cases did you use it? Or with regard to which items? With regard to which items?
So Monteco Brown's DNA profile was compared to the DNA mixture that was obtained from Exhibit 31.
And that's the only thing, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what was that item?
He is excluded as a source of the major DNA profile from Exhibit 25 and the mixed DNA profile from Exhibit 31. So he was compared to 2 items, actually. I apologize.
And that would be 25 and 31, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
The earbuds and the...
Exhibit 25 is the interior rear driver compartment.
Your grounds.
It's hard for me, when we approach sidebar, it's hard for me to explain.
All right. Then may I approach at sidebar.
Thank you, Honor. Now, thank you, Honor. Now, with regard to, let's talk about the interior, the vehicle swabs that you received. Number 63 of the FDLE, the interior driver's compartment. You indicated that there were 3 people, but it was not interpretable. Is that correct?
I think I reported as a mixture of at least 2 individuals, and the minor contributor is not interpretable.
Now, when a DNA mixture is not interpretable, or when the minor contributor is not interpretable, you can use that to exclude a person as being a part of that mixture. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you explain to the jury what that means?
Hold on, let me backtrack. I apologize. What was the last question?
Okay. When you have a mixture and you indicate that it's not interpretable, you can still use that mixture to exclude a person.
No. If a mixture is not interpretable, it cannot be used for comparison.
So you can't exclude a person either.
I can't use it for inclusion or exclusion.
Okay. Now you indicated the interior driver's door had a major profile and a minor profile. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, the minor profile in that case, was it enough that you could use to exclude persons?
No, I reported it as not interpretable.
And when you indicate there's at least 2 people's DNA, could you determine exactly how many persons' DNA is on a particular item?
No, that is why I stated at least 2. It could be 2 or more.
And is there a way for you to determine that?
No, unless I created the mixture myself, there's no way of telling how many people are actually in a mixture.
Now, we've been talking about touch DNA, but touch DNA doesn't mean your fingers have to touch it. Is that correct? Meaning your fingers. It could be any
Not
part of the
necessarily
body.
fingers. It can be any part of the body, and the entire body is covered with skin. So it's not necessarily hands that touched or made contact with that item of evidence.
Okay, so any part of your body that makes contact with an item of evidence could leave DNA,
Potentially it could, yes.
and you would call that touch DNA.
Yes.
Now, a person could spit when they're talking, and that would leave DNA. Is that correct?
That's correct, but then that is not touch DNA.
Okay. Now, would you be able to distinguish if someone spat and left some DNA on a vehicle, whether or not that was touch DNA or if it came from saliva?
No.
You would just basically look at how much DNA is given to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, for each of the swabs from the vehicle, there were at least 3 or more contributors. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, is there any way for you to determine when DNA is left on an item?
No.
What would determine how long DNA is left on an item?
There's no way to determine how long a DNA has been left behind on an item.
So you couldn't tell if that DNA had been there for an hour or 3 weeks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you would have no idea when it was placed there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And isn't it true that there is a concept in DNA called transference?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what that is?
So transference is, say for example, which I'm not an expert of by any means, I've just read articles about it, and it's been discussed in the lab. Say, for example, you shook the hand of a person, and that person put his hands in his pocket. Then it's possible that the other person who that person shook hands with could be deposited on the person's pocket.
So with the idea of transference, you wouldn't even actually have to make contact with that object, is that correct?
That's correct. But with the amount of DNA that I obtained from the swabs that have complex mixtures, I doubt that it was transference.
What about with regard to the one where you actually, where Mr. Richardson matched the profile, the major profile?
It is a significant amount of DNA, and he is the major contributor. So it is my opinion that it's not transfer DNA.
I don't have any further questions.
All right, redirect. May this witness be excused?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You're excused.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. State, call your next witness.
Rachel Auckland. I totally apologize. I forgot to ask a very significant question of the last witness. Please stop her. It's one question.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Come on up one more time in the witness chair, please.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
It's okay.
Did you examine State's Exhibit 332?
Yes.
Okay. Where is that represented as coming from?
It's an unknown projectile from the rear side of front passenger seat, backrest, in front of car seat.
Okay, in front of a car seat?
Yes.
All right. What were your findings as it relates to this particular item?
A complete DNA profile consistent with a male individual is obtained.
And who did that match?
It matches the DNA profile from the bloodstain card of Aden Mcclendon.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
All right, any questions from the defense on that issue?
No, sir.
That's right. All right, now may this witness be excused.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And you may call your next witness again.
Rachel
sort of swear or affirm that the testimony you give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so be God? Thank you.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury as I totally mispronounced your name, and then spell it?
It's okay. I'm Rachel Aflein, Oefelein, and I'm a senior DNA analyst and quality assurance manager at DNA Labs International.
Where's your lab located?
Deerfield Beach, which is in South Florida.
Is it a private lab?
Yes.
Can you explain is there any difference between a private lab?
The difference between private labs and government labs is that we work for multiple jurisdictions. So if you've heard of things like the sexual assault backlog or things like that, sometimes forensic processing is too much for a single laboratory to handle, so that remainder of that work gets outsourced to private laboratories.
And do you all, as private labs, have to keep kind of on the cutting edge of DNA?
Yes. So one of the advantages to being a private lab is we have to match up with all the technologies that all the jurisdictions that we work with offer. So this means that we oftentimes have different technologies, newer technologies, but much in the same way that public labs operate, we still have to operate under their same standards and protocols as well.
Can you explain what your education, training, and background is to fulfill your position?
Yes, I have a bachelor's from Loyola University in New Orleans in criminal justice with a forensic science minor, and I have a master's of science in forensic science from Strathclyde University, which is located in the United Kingdom. I conducted my master's dissertation research at the Institute Expertise Satowice, which is located in Krakow, Poland. After that, I was hired by the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory, working in mitochondrial DNA. So that's DNA that you just got from your mother, and that's used to identify soldiers that have died in past conflicts like World War I and II, Korea and Vietnam. I was in that section for about 2 years and completed the DNA technician training program there. And then I went on to complete the Army's DNA analyst training program and moved into current conflicts. So things like identifying soldiers from that passed away in the Middle East, as well as analyzing DNA for crimes that occur on military bases. After that, I was hired by DNA Labs International in November of 2014. I completed their analyst training program, and in addition to that, I complete a minimum of 8 hours of continuing education every year.
And in addition to your duties as a DNA analyst, are you also the quality assurance manager?
Yes, I became the quality assurance manager at DNA Labs International in April of 2015, and that just means I'm in charge of their entire quality program. So I conduct an internal audit every year. I'm in charge of something called proficiency testing program. That's a monitoring of forensic scientists to ensure that they're getting the correct results and meeting all the standards in our community.
Okay. We just heard from another DNA analyst, so we are familiar with DNA. Are you familiar with a term called, probabilistic genotyping?
Yes.
What is it?
So traditionally, DNA in past years and methods was this, you have to have a statistic. So we're not allowed to just say, I think this person's in there, or I don't think they're in there. You have to have some sort of statistical weight to this. So you could say, I believe there might be included or excluded, and this is how strong that evidence is, and you apply a statistic to that. So in the past, you would look at the individuality of that profile. So you might hear something like you would have to see 500 million planet Earths to see this profile one time. You're talking about how rare that one individual profile is. Probabilistic genotyping, on the other hand, considers two different sets of propositions. So you might say, I have a DNA mixture of 3 individuals, and I think this DNA mixture is these 2 unknown people and this one person, versus it's these 3 unknown people. And we're going to compare those 2 scenarios and determine which is more probable. So we can look at things like single source, but it is more useful in low-level DNA profiles as well as mixed DNA profiles.
And probabilistic genotyping, is that a way to give kind of relevance or meaning to the DNA results that you might get by traditional testing?
Yes, so again, we're looking at the weight of that evidence. If we're saying that we believe that circumstances are better explained by including an individual into mixture, well, how certain are we of that? What's the probability of that? So comparing those two different scenarios is what we call likelihood ratio. So it's the weight of the evidence given one set of propositions versus the weight of the evidence given another set of propositions.
And what is star mix?
StarMix is a type of probabilistic genotyping software. So the method itself is probabilistic genotyping, but there's different brands that we can use. So the brand that our laboratory employs is called StarMix. It's not the only one. So kind of like if you have tissue, it's like Kleenex versus CVS brand tissue. They're essentially doing very similar things, but it's different brands of software.
I want to talk about some of the evidence that was submitted to you. If you could refer to your report as needed. Did you get some standards in this case, specifically the standard of Henry Hayes, the fourth, Sanquon Bradford, Kwame Richardson, Cynthia Hayes, and Henry Hayes III?
Yes, we did. And to clarify for that, so standards of DNA are usually just like buccal swabs or a blood stain card, so where they're obtaining DNA of a known individual. In this case, we did receive those standards, but we also received extracts. So that's after the DNA has already been extracted out. It comes in a test tube. So we had 2 sets of extracts for standards that had been processed already by the laboratory submitting the case.
Did you also receive swabs from a 9mm gun and an AK gun?
Yes.
Okay. And then obviously the AK was from different portions of the gun.
Yes.
Okay. And then did you also receive a swab from some 7.62 live rounds?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. I want to first talk to you about the live rounds. What were your findings as it relates to the live rounds, the 7.62 live rounds?
No DNA was detected on those items. So in DNA processing, we're first going to extract the DNA. So it might come as a swab or an evidence item. We're going to collect that biological material and extract that DNA. And then the next step is quantitation. So we have to determine how much DNA is there. If no DNA is present, then we stop processing. There's nothing else to be done at that point. So that was the case for the swab from the live rounds, that no DNA was detected, so no further analysis was performed.
Is that unusual when you're looking at something called touch DNA?
No, it's not unusual, and particularly it's not unusual with parts from the interior of the gun. So live rounds or magazines tend to have less DNA than the exterior of the gun.
Okay. Now I want to talk about the AK that's been described for you, the swab from the sight, exterior and interior of that gun. What were your findings as it relates to those 3?
The swab from the AK variant exterior?
Yes.
So for that particular sample, a DNA profile was obtained. That profile was a mixture of 2 individuals, so we're seeing DNA from at least 2 individuals there. And Henry Hayes IV, Sanquon Bradford, Kwame Richardson, Cynthia Hayes, and Henry Hayes III were excluded as contributors to that mixed DNA profile, so their types were not present in that mixture. Additional comparisons could be conducted, but we would need additional standards to do that.
Okay. And then what about the sights in the interior?
The swab from the AK variant interior?
Yes.
No blood was detected on that item. So sometimes in this case it was a swab submitted. We're going to do testing if there's any indication blood could possibly be present. So if we get a swab and there's no color on it, or maybe a pale gray color, we wouldn't do blood testing. But if we get a swab that's red or brown in color, or maybe black where it could be masking blood, we would do a blood test on this. So based on the coloring of this swab, we did a blood test, but no blood was detected. And an insufficient amount of DNA was detected, therefore no further analysis was performed. So we had DNA, but it wasn't enough to go forward with.
And what about the variant sites?
For the variant sites, no DNA was detected.
Okay. Did you conduct an analysis of the Glock 26?
We received an extract from the gun from the Glock 26. No DNA profile were obtained from that item. No DNA profile was obtained from that item.
And what about the swab from the 9mm gun?
So the swab from the 9mm gun, we did obtain a DNA profile from that, and that indicated a mixture of at least 2 individuals with at least 1 male contributor. We say 1 because the way we identify whether or not a male is present is the same if it's 1 male versus 3 males. So we know there's at least 1 male there, and we know there's at least 2 people, but we don't say how many males for certain. And Kwame Richardson could not be ruled out as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile obtained from that item. Therefore, it was reanalyzed using StarMix, a probabilistic genotyping software. So sometimes when we look at a mixed DNA profile, we can say outright, this individual is excluded. So if you'd heard about DNA before, we're looking at a series of numbers that make up the DNA profile. If a person's numbers aren't there, they're simply excluded. That's it. There's nothing more that can be done. However, sometimes if we do see their numbers that are present in that profile, then we can further analyze it, which is what we did in this case and went forward with probabilistic genotyping. And the DNA profile obtained from that item was approximately 540 times more probable if the sample originated from Kwame Richardson and 2 unknown persons than if it originated from 3 unknown persons. Therefore, there's strong support that Kwame Richardson and 2 unknown persons contributed to that mixed DNA profile rather than 3 unknown persons. Henry Hayes IV, Sanquan Bradford, Cynthia Hayes, and Henry Hayes III were excluded as contributors to that mixed DNA profile.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
All right, Cross. Well, Mr. Hernandez, since we're going in order, do you have any questions, sir? Yes, sir, please.
Stated that the DNA profile from the side exterior of the AK-47 Henry Hayes IV was excluded. Is that correct, ma'am?
Can you repeat the item again?
Yes, the AK-47.
So we have the variant exterior was the DNA profiles that we make comparison to, and he was excluded from that profile.
And the swab from the 9mm gun, he was also excluded from that too. Is that correct?
Correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Ray.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, evening.
All right. First, I want to ask you, okay, with regard to your probabilistic genotyping, it is fair to say that you can use less DNA or DNA that doesn't meet certain thresholds that FDLE requires. Is that correct?
That'd be incorrect. So thresholds that were used in the past, what we call a stochastic threshold. So that's if you picture DNA like a heart monitor with when it beeps and goes up and down, and each of those peaks get assigned a number, that's what creates our DNA profile. So in the past, again, if you picture those peaks, there was a line, and any peaks that were below that line couldn't be considered as part of your statistical analysis. With probabilistic genotyping, we look at everything. So there is no line anymore. And since then, FDLE has also employed probabilistic genotyping, so they as well would not have a stochastic threshold.
But with regard to STR DNA analysis, that line will still exist. Is that correct?
So this is still STR analysis, so everything leading up to your profile is exactly the same. It's how you calculate your statistic that differs.
Okay. Now, in this case, you indicated that you didn't have a 1 in 700 billion type of statistic. Is that correct?
Correct. That would be looking at an individual opposed to the mixture as a whole.
Okay. So in this case, you're looking at the entire mixture and determining how probable it is that you're going to see that person's DNA within the results that you found. Is that correct?
So it's determining how probable one scenario is over another. So this individual and 2 unknown people versus 3 unknown people.
Okay. So in this case, you indicated that it was 540 times more likely that Mr. Richardson's DNA would be, and 2 unknown persons would be found versus 3 unknown persons, is that correct?
540 times more probable that the mixture is better explained by Kwame Richardson and 2 unknowns. So depending on the number of your likelihood ratio, it's designated a verbal support. And in this case, strong support was the designation that gets assigned to a 540 likelihood ratio.
Okay. Now, with regard to your verbal scale, you also, strong support would be any number that's between 100 and 1,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you also have provides very strong support. Is that correct?
Correct. That would be anything over 1,000 up to 1 million.
And then the last one you would have is extremely strong support.
Correct. That would be any likelihood ratio over 1 million.
So in this case, you simply have strong support, but it could go all the way up to over 1 million. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to your probabilistic genotyping, is it true that if you ran these numbers through your system again, you may get a different result?
So the overall result would not change. So whether it's supporting one set of propositions over the other, but however the number can slightly change. So it's used doing a method of sampling. So for example, if you were to throw a quarter into the air 1 million times, you would expect about 500,000 to get heads and 500,000 to get tails. However, we know that it doesn't statistically work that way. Sometimes you might get slightly less, sometimes you might get slightly more. However, that number is going to relatively stay the same, and it's not going to change the overall answer. We also have multiple methods of adding a layer of conservatism to it. So oftentimes it's reported as at least 540 times more probable because we've added all these layers of conservative to make that number lower and lower.
Now, this is a relatively new type of analysis of DNA, is that correct?
Incorrect.
Okay. How long has it been around?
Probabilistic genotyping has been around since the mid-2000s. This particular brand of software was employed in New Zealand and Australia in 2012. It went live with the FBI and USISL, which is the United States Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory, around 2014, 2015, and our laboratory has been using it since the end of 2015.
Okay, so approximately 3 years.
For our laboratory, I believe, yes, about 3 years.
Okay. Now, you would agree that since 2015, they've come out with several versions of Star Mix. Is that correct?
Yes. We originally started in version 2.3 and since then have gone to version 2.4.
Okay. And when you have those different versions, you also have error codes associated with those versions. Is that correct?
Sometimes, not necessarily, but yes.
Okay. Now, what version did you use in this case?
May I refer to my notes?
Yes, ma'am.
This was using version 2.3.07, so the version is actually 2.3, and then we have what we call decimal releases, so the decimal release would be 0.07.
Okay, and would you agree that there have been some error codes associated with that version of Star Mix?
I don't believe there's been multiple error codes associated with that specific version. There was error codes in previous versions. I believe there was one in this version. However, it did not apply to this case.
And why did it not apply?
So most of the error codes, software coding, if I can backtrack slightly, is written out in code and then it's transcribed into the way that the computer can understand it. So there's not a meaningful way to examine the code itself, rather the results. So I can put in a mixture of half of my DNA and half of your DNA and I know what the result should be based on that. So you can in that way test it to make sure you're getting the correct answers by putting in what we call ground truth situations where we know what the answer should be. And in doing that, sometimes in very rare specific circumstances, we can see that the answer isn't exactly what we expected. And in that way, you can go back and target a tiny specific piece of the source code to try to determine if something needs to be corrected. So there's been multiple versions that have addressed some of those situations. However, the main source codes that have been changed didn't affect this case or really any of our cases. They affected things like database searching, which wasn't employed in this case. So that would be if you took a DNA mixture and searched against a database of known people. However, that wasn't done in this case. One of the more recent source code errors actually resulted in LRs that or likelihood ratios that were slightly lower. So if anything, it would have increased the likelihood ratio, not decreased it. So our overall answer would have still remained the same.
Okay, now let me ask you this with regard to StarMix. With regard to that type of software, you can actually make a determination as to the percentage that each individual has contributed to a mixture, is that correct?
Correct. The software will make an estimation of the proportions of each individual contributing to that DNA profile.
Okay, so in this case, if you're assuming 3 persons, can you tell us what the individual contributions are?
Yes, that would be, they designate as contributor numbers. So we have contributor 1, 2, and 3. Contributor 1 is estimated at 46%. Contributor 2 is estimated at 33%, and contributor 3 is estimated at 21%.
Okay, so Mr. Richardson will be contributor 1, is that correct?
Correct.
And then contributor 2, the next one is 33%, is that correct?
Correct. That's what it estimated the proportion for contributor 2.
And then the last one will be 21%, is that correct?
Correct.
I don't have any further questions.
Redirect. All right, may this witness be excused?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You're excused.
Thank you.
One more witness. All right, well, let's call Detective Scott then.
Have one additional.
See, there's 2 more witnesses then.
Two more witnesses, I'm sorry, in addition to the one that you do on the phone.
While he's coming, let me see y'all real quick at sidebar. Just lawyers, no court reporter.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Detective Scott, I just had a brief question to ask you. When I was talking to you earlier, you had some difficulty remembering the style of Sanquon Bradford's hair at the time that he was arrested on February the 9th, 2016.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Your Honor, could I approach?
You may.
I'm going to show you what has been filed for identification as states 22L.
Okay.
Do you recognize that?
Yes, sir.
And what is that?
It says arrest and booking photo from February 9th, 2016.
Your Honor, at this time I would move this into evidence, cases of 22L.
Any objection? That's right. You said no objection? Okay, it'd be so admitted. As the next state's exhibit.
It will be 549 for Richardson and 547 for Hayes.
All right.
Your Honor, could I publish to the jury?
You may.
No, I do not have any further questions.
Cross.
No cross, Your Honor.
Can I ask one question?
You could ask.
When did you arrest Paul Richardson?
I'll allow it.
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear you.
I'll allow the question.
Okay. Mind if I refer to my report?
Yes, sir.
He was arrested on 3/29/17 at the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office.
All right, may this witness be excused?
Yes, sir.
And thank you, Detective. You're excused, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right, State, you may call your last witness for today.
Yes, sir, we would call Dr. Valerie Rao.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good late afternoon, Dr. Rao. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Dr. Valerie Rao. My last name is spelled R-A-O.
Dr. Rao, what is your occupation?
I am the Chief Medical Examiner for District 4, which includes Clay, Duval, and Nassau counties. In addition to that, we cover part of District 3, which is Hamilton and Columbia counties.
So as the Chief Medical Examiner, you're basically in charge of the office.
Correct.
Back in January of 2016 and through today, has Dr. Nicolescu also been employed by your office?
Yes,
And what is his position?
he is an Associate Medical Examiner.
And although Dr. Nicolescu performed the autopsy and authored the report in this case, were you also directly involved in the investigation and autopsy of Aden Mcclendon?
Yes,
Did that include examining the body of Aden Mcclendon and viewing the vehicle together with the car seat where Aden Mcclendon was located at the time he was shot?
yes.
We're going to address this a little bit later, but why is it sometimes important in your role as a medical examiner to view some of the physical evidence related to a crime?
Sorry, I didn't follow that.
Why is it sometimes important beyond just the autopsy to see some of the actual evidence?
Okay, so sometimes most of the time, it's very important. The autopsy is just part of the cause and manner of death determination. If we find something that needs to be corroborated by the evidence of the scene, then we will take that into account, visit the scene, and make sure that everything matches to the investigation of this case.
So in addition to being involved in the autopsy and looking at the evidence, is it, as the chief medical examiner, are you routinely called upon to testify for other medical examiners?
Yes,
And how long have you been employed with the District 4 Examiner's Office?
for 13 years.
What is your educational training and background that allows you to fulfill your position and occupation?
I got my degree in medicine in 1971, after which I went to London. I spent a year and a half doing pathology at 2 hospitals in London, one in the East End of London, St. Andrew's Hospital, the other in the South End of London, St. Heliers Hospital, after which I came to the United States, where I did 5 years of training, 2 years doing clinical pathology at Albany Medical Center, Albany, New York, and anatomic pathology, after which I did forensic pathology for 1 year at the Office of the Medical Examiner in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm board certified in clinical, anatomic, and forensic pathology. I then went to Tucson, Arizona for a year, where I was medical examiner, after which I went to Miami-Dade County. I was there for 19 years as an associate medical examiner. I was then the chief medical examiner in District 5 for 3 years. I then took a teaching position in the University of Missouri in Columbia. I was there for 2 years and then came to Jacksonville.
Okay, thank you. I heard you use the term pathology a number of times. What does that mean?
So pathology means the study of disease in the human body.
And if we were to use the term forensic pathology, what does that mean?
Okay, so in order to be a forensic pathologist, one had to go through the training to be a pathologist, so that's the 4-year training. And the pathology is divided into 2. One is clinical pathology. For example, you went to the hospital and you had a series of tests done. Those tests are actually certified by the clinical pathologist. And the anatomic part of the pathology is, for example, you went to a hospital and you had your gallbladder out or your appendix out or a tumor out. That is studied by the anatomic pathologist. So after that, you go 1 more year into training for forensic pathology, which is a subspecialty, and it deals with sudden, unexpected, unnatural death. For example, homicides, traffic accidents, drug overdoses, of which we have several in our area. And for example, a child dies of unknown, undetermined circumstances. All these cases will come under the jurisdiction of the medical examiner and forensic pathology.
So as part of your duties as chief medical examiner, does that include performing autopsies?
Yes, it's one part of the entire investigation.
Can you explain to the jury what an autopsy is and how you perform one on a human being?
Yes, so pathology means to see for oneself, and in this particular case, dealing with the forensic cases, it's not like in the hospital autopsy where you know why the person died. You suffer from cancer. The doctors just want to know if the treatment was appropriate, so they would do a hospital autopsy. In the forensic autopsy, you're looking for what could have caused the death of this individual. So when the body arrives, the body is looked at carefully before anything is touched. Photographs are taken. Then the body is disrobed, clothing taken out. Again, the body is looked at by the medical examiner or the associate medical examiner. Photographs are taken. Then a Y-shaped incision is made from beneath the collarbones right here. The incision is met in the middle, and then the incision is carried all the way down to the pubic area. And the organs are looked at without removing to see what could have caused the death. For example, gunshot wound. You look at what the bullet has done in the body. Then each of the organs is removed from the body. They are weighed. And the reason we weigh the organs is sometimes pathology causes a discrepancy between normal weights and abnormal weights. That's why the organs are weighed. Then each of the organs is sectioned, again looking for a cause of death. Pieces of tissue are taken from target organs, for example, the heart, the liver, the lungs, studied under the microscope. Fluid is taken from the eye, it's sent for toxicology. Blood is taken from the heart, sent for toxicology. Urine and gallbladder, and the bile from the gallbladder. This is looking for the presence of drugs and alcohol, which could cause the death of an individual. An incision is made from one ear to the other. The scalp is put forward and back, and then the skull is opened. The brain is looked at again. The brain is then removed, sectioned, and then the cause and manner of death is determined.
Can you give us any estimate at all as far as how many autopsies you have performed in your career?
Thousands of cases.
All right, and you stated before, I believe, that you've been involved with autopsies involving gunshot wounds?
Many, many times, hundreds of times.
And do you have experiences identifying the entry and exit wounds from the gunshot wound?
Yes.
And also, what about the path that the bullet may have traveled through the body?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to move Dr. Rao in as an expert.
Any voir dire?
No more dire.
All right, you may continue.
Thank you, sir. So, regarding the autopsy of Aden Mcclendon, could you tell the jury what the date of the autopsy was?
30th of January, 2016.
Was that the date of Aden Mcclendon's death?
No, it was the previous day, 29th of January, 2016.
Where was the autopsy conducted?
At the medical examiner's office, 2100 Jefferson Street, just behind UF Health.
Could you say what the reported age of Aden Mcclendon was at the time of his death?
22 months,
And how much did he weigh?
35 pounds.
Can you tell the jury how Aden Mcclendon was clothed when the autopsy was initiated?
He was nude. He came from the hospital.
So, I'm going to show you some photographs related to the autopsy, okay? We're looking at states 415. Can you tell us what we're seeing here with the 16-0189?
Yes, so this is the legal identification of the child. Legal identification meaning that 16-0189 is in the year 2016. This child was the 189th body that came to the medical examiner's office. So that number is unique to the decedent.
All right, I'd like to show you states 416. Was there medical intervention related to Aden Mcclendon's body coming from the hospital?
Yes,
States 417, we're seeing medical intervention again.
Yes.
States 418, can you tell us what we're seeing here?
Okay, so on the cheek, you're seeing a small little abrasion. Abrasion is when the skin is rubbed off, one there, and a small little one right there.
Can you tell what the cause of that was?
Any blunt impact would cause that injury.
So could it be from a car seat or a part of the car or a fragment from a bullet?
Yes.
I want to show you States 419. How many gunshot wounds did we have in this case?
3.
All right, and this is the first one that we're seeing here?
First meaning not the first gunshot that was sustained, but just we start to number them from the top of the body to the bottom. So this is the first gunshot wound, meaning it was to the top of the head.
And can you tell the jury what we see here?
Yes, so you can't really see it well, but you can see the blood, the clotted blood coming from that injury. So the injury is right there.
So would that have bled when the injury was actually incurred?
Yes,
States 420, this is a close-up.
correct.
States 421, what are we seeing here?
Okay, so here you're seeing that the hair is shaved so that we can determine the nature of the injury. And you can see that this is a graze wound to the top of the child's head.
And can you tell us where, as far as location exactly on the head, you would have described it based on the autopsy?
The top of the head.
The top of the head? And what about as far as the path that the bullet was traveling?
Okay, so in these type of injuries, depending on the depth of the wound, it is possible to tell the directionality because of if you look very carefully, there are little tags of skin that point to the weapon which is coming from this direction. So the weapon is here, so it's going from left to right that way.
Show you States 422, another shot of the same.
Yes, so here you can see that I'm talking about those little tags right there that point towards the left side.
And again, the wound pattern is left to right.
Correct,
And it's from back to front.
correct.
I want to show you State Exhibit 423 and talk about the gunshot wound of the left arm.
Yes, so this is the gunshot wound. This is the entrance going in the front of his elbow area right there.
And the entry wound is, it's large.
Sorry.
The entry wound that you have circled? It
Yes,
appears
yes.
A large entry wound?
Yes, correct.
And what could that be caused by?
It's a gunshot wound.
States 424. Could you tell us what we're seeing here? Do you recall coming out and actually viewing the vehicle in which Aden Mcclendon was located when he was shot?
Yes.
All right, I want to ask you specifically about what we call here dowels. This one and this one. Now, the purpose of the dowels, so that the jury can understand, was we were following the gunshot path.
Correct.
And I'll show you States 425, and number 4 is the same gunshot path that we saw here, so that they can follow.
Yes.
And then what we saw here, moving forward to 425, we can follow the path there.
Correct.
426. Now I want to go back to reference this again so that everyone can follow. I know that you understand. When we're seeing the top of the car seat, at the dowel going through it. Is it accurate? This is what we are seeing here.
Yes.
So, can you tell us if this dowel and this gunshot would have been responsible to the gunshot wound to the left arm?
Which one in particular? Because there are two.
I'm sorry, this one right here.
Yes.
This is another 427 showing through the seat. 428, what do we see here? This is a close-up.
This is a close-up of the entrance wound, correct?
And 429,
Okay.
tell us what we're seeing here.
Okay, so that is the exit wound the child sustained on the left arm.
Can you tell us the position of how the arm would have been at the time for the entry and exit?
Can't really tell because, you know, the body is going to be moving in the car seat. But when we interpret the path of the bullet, which is the way the bullet goes through the body, we hold the body in the anatomic position, which means that the person stands upright and the palms face forward. So that is not necessarily the way the gunshot wound was sustained, but that is for the way we interpret. So it is actually going from the front of the child to the back of the child's arm. So the arm could have been, you know, bent, it could have been straight. Difficult for us to really tell you the position of the arm.
Could you tell us if it's consistent with, we talked about the head, that it was from left to right. Could we say that this was also left to right?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the child's arm could possibly have been over his head, yes.
430, this is a close-up of what we just discussed.
Correct.
431, closer.
Yes.
432. Now, I want to show you states 433. Can you tell us what we're seeing here?
Okay, so we take x-rays on all gunshot wounds or any perforating or penetrating wounds to the body. So this x-ray is of the child, and you can see in the left arm that there are fragments of the bullet that are retained in the arm.
States 434. Can you tell us what we're seeing here?
Yes, so these are the fragments that were recovered from the child's arm.
And these are consistent with what we saw in the x-ray?
Yes,
States 435, close-up of the fragments?
correct.
I want to show you states 438.
Okay, so this is the surgical intervention the hospital undertook in order to try to save this child. And so this is the incision that went right through the entrance gunshot wound. So we tried to put it back as it should be, and that right there is the entrance wound.
States 439, a close-up of that?
Correct. You can see an attempt to reconstruct that entrance gunshot wound.
States 440, could you tell us what we're seeing here?
Okay, so you're not seeing the whole thing because the surgical intervention has been quite dramatic in this child. So that area is covered by the brown paper, but this right here is the child's abdomen or belly. And you can see the orientation because this is the genitals of the child. This is the right side, and this right here is the exit wound.
All right, and what we're seeing here, is this related to medical intervention?
Correct.
States 441.
That's a close-up of the exit wound on the child's belly.
All right, so with regard to the gunshot wound to the left upper back, could you tell us the path that the bullet traveled?
Yes, so the a gunshot wound is coming from the child's left back, gets into his left chest cavity after going through we have spaces between our ribs. This was the 7th space, went through the lower lobe of his left lung, then went through his aorta, which is the largest blood vessel in our body, supplying oxygenated blood to the body, went through that, went through his colon, which is the bowel, went through his liver, and then exited the body.
And could you tell us the path of the bullet?
Yes. So from back to front, left to right, and downwards.
So through the shoulder?
If I was to explain it, I would stand up. So coming from here, exiting right here.
Thank you. So, in addition, did you take a blood sample that was given to law enforcement in order to be tested related to DNA?
Yes, we always take 2 DNA cards for homicides and a single DNA card for everybody else. That purpose of taking 2 is one to be given to law enforcement.
Could you tell us if the gunshot wound to the left upper back that exited through the stomach, if that was the fatal injury?
Yes.
Could you tell us what the cause and manner of death was in Aden Mcclendon?
Homicide.
I'm sorry.
Homicide.
Could you tell us the cause and manner of death?
Cause of death, gunshot wounds. Manner of death, homicide.
That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
All right, Cross.
No cross, Your Honor.
Ms. Wright. All right, may this witness be excused?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rao, you're excused.
Your Honor, if I approach from the court of order.
You may. Monday at 9 a.m. I know where we are with the case. I met with the lawyers during our break. There's not a whole lot of evidence left to go. We're going to finish that portion of the trials Monday morning-ish. And at that point, the trials are going to have to split up a little bit because we're going to do closing arguments in one and give that jury the case. And then when that's over, or even if it's not over, bring the other jury back and have the closing arguments to that jury. So, ladies and gentlemen of Mr. Richardson's jury, you're going to come Monday at 9 o'clock just like the other jury, but you'll probably have a relatively short day on Monday and then come back on Tuesday. So you can plan accordingly now for things that you need to do Monday, late morning, afternoon. I can't promise exactly what time, but sometime Monday. And ladies and gentlemen of Mr. Hayes' jury, you'll continue on through Monday and would likely conclude the case. We'll certainly have the case to you to deliberate Monday. How long you all will deliberate, of course, is fluid. It changes with each case. So obviously you're going to have a long break over the weekend. Don't give in to the temptation to talk about the case, look up the case. You're almost there. You're almost done. It's been a long week. Some trials are long and some trials are short. This is a long one, or these trials are long. I was thinking earlier, it's somewhat, I wish 4th of July wasn't going to bump right up on the end of it. But now I realize it's really kind of appropriate, isn't it? I think, because we're going to be done by then. But I can think of no better holiday to think about, to celebrate, for you all to have to think about and celebrate when you're done with this work. Because you've had a uniquely or virtually uniquely American experience this week to serve as on a jury. And not on any other case, but on obviously very important cases. There's really no other country in the world where this happens. Even in the freest, most advanced democracies of the world, men and women like me, judges, get to decide cases, but not here. We select random citizens to come down to the courthouse every week to decide these cases. So if you think about it, where can you see that proposition put to the test? Can a people govern themselves? Are we capable of it then in a jury trial, in a criminal case in particular? So you reflect upon that on this weekend, or mow your grass like I'm going to do. Get some rest. Come back Monday morning at 9 a.m. We'll see you then. You're excused.